Good morning and welcome to our panelists today and to all of our audience members across the world. We're very happy to have you with us. I'm Karen Ryan. I'm the Senior Advisor for Human Rights here at the Carter Center in Atlanta. And today we will be hosting a very timely and interesting discussion called Securing Nigeria. And obviously it's a very, very interesting topic given recent events and the successful election that has just been held in Nigeria. We're going to be looking at local approaches to preventing and defeating terrorism. We understand from the newly elected president that he's going to be making the combating of terrorism in Nigeria a high priority, and I know that the people of Nigeria are very happy with this focus, given what's happening. So I'm going to introduce our panelists here, and then we will watch a video that has been produced by the Office of the National Security Advisor on countering violent extremism in Nigeria. But let me first welcome our panelists. We have Dr. Fatima Akilu, who is the Director of Behavior Analysis and Strategic Communications in the Counterterrorism Department of the Office of the National Security Advisor in Nigeria. Dr. Akilu's work in the field of psychology spans 3 continents, Africa, Europe, and the United States. The effectiveness of her work rests on the ability to communicate with people at all levels. And she is currently responsible for policy formulation and execution of the strategy in that part of Nigeria's work on counterterrorism, which focuses on de-radicalization, counter-radicalization, and strategic communication. Welcome, Dr. Fatima Akilu. And then we also have M. Sani Umar, Professor Umar, who is a professor in the Department of History at Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, Nigeria. His research interests include religious violence and peace building, religious pluralism, contemporary Islamic thought and movements, and Islamic intellectual traditions of West Africa. And we also hope to be joined today by Jaye Gaskia, who is the chair of the People Against Violent Extremism, or PAVE, coalition. It's a public affairs, and he is a political affairs and political commentator and analyst, and has many areas of interest, including development, human rights, gender issues, etc. So we have a wonderful panel today, and we're going to start by playing this video that has been produced by the Office of the National Security Advisor, Countering Violent Extremism effort, and then we will resume our discussion with our distinguished guests.
Violent extremism turns radical views into violent actions. When individuals or groups promote or engage in violence as a means of furthering their radical views, those views become a threat to national unity and stability. As Africa's most populous and economically successful country, Nigeria is rich in resources and has enjoyed industrial growth. Yet, unfortunately, there has been a rise in the number and activities of militant groups over the past decade. Nigeria plays a vital role in regional stability and the security of the continent as a whole. Extremists are opposed to everything Nigerians stand for, considering all those who believe in peaceful coexistence, tolerance and acceptance to be legitimate targets of attack. Something must be done. Every Nigerian has a role to play in countering violent extremism. Nigeria's comprehensive CVE strategy seeks to address extremism by preventing attacks before they happen, while also tackling radicalization where it exists and offering those involved a way out. Education is a fundamental tool. Building community engagement and resilience will allow for positive role models to be heard and help those who've been directly affected by violent extremists. The objective is to create a generation of citizens with the capacity for critical thinking and logical reasoning, who understand core national values and who are prepared for the global age we live in. These initiatives will drastically reduce the scope and appeal of violent extremist groups and combat the persistence of radicalization in Nigeria. From government ministries to departments, agencies, and individual civilians, a comprehensive CVE strategy involves everyone. We all have a part to play to ensure peace, stability, and hope. Through collaboration and the empowerment of Nigerian society, we can succeed in overcoming violent extremism. Let's work together for the promise of brighter days to come.
Hello again to our audience watching our program, Securing Nigeria, Local Approaches to Countering Violent Extremism. Thanks for that video to the Office of the National Security Advisor, which gives us a little bit of a taste of how this important effort is happening, is being organized by the government of Nigeria. So again, we have with us today Dr. Fatima Akilu from the Office of the National Security Advisor, Professor Sani Umar from Ahmadu Bello University. And we hope to be joined by Jaye Gaskia of PAVE, the People Against Violent Extremism Coalition. Hope he will
Hello.
let us. Hi, Jaye Gaskia. Have you joined us on the call?
Yes, I'm in.
Wonderful. Welcome to the call. So I wanted to let our audience know that we are in audio mode here. We don't have video capacity for our guests in Nigeria today, but we are really pleased to have all of them join us. So I'm going to open the conversation here with Professor Umar. If you could talk to us about the development of extremism in Nigeria, specifically if you could talk to us about how Boko Haram came to be and how it developed as a group, and why did they transform into this violent terrorist regional actor. Can you just take us back and explain to us how this emerged? Because we know it didn't come out of nowhere, and it's not that it just happened on the horizon when the American people, for our American audience, learned of it more recently when the large group, the Chibok girls, were kidnapped, and there was a large campaign in the United States. But we know that this has been going on for many years. Can you talk to us about the evolution of this group?
Sure. I think you can look at the evolution of the group in different phases of its history. The broader context will be the rise of Islamicist movements in Nigeria, which has been part of the broader trend globally. And you are looking at maybe the late 1970s to early 80s. That's when these movements began to become active. But as they evolved through the 80s and 1990s, factionalization became a feature of their organizational activities, and several breakaway factions developed. And one of the breakaway factions, the one that became Boko Haram, emerged in the late 1990s and early 2000s as a breakaway faction from the different Islamic movements that were active in the country for over 2 decades. And in terms of their evolution, I think a critical point that should be understood is the difference between being radical and being violent radical. For most of their history, they were just radicals. They were not violent. The offensive violence was what happened in the late 1999, 2000, early 2000. That's when the tendency towards becoming violent began to manifest. And the first major eruption of violence was in the summer of 2009, in July 2009. Earlier than that date, there were a few skirmishes in local areas in the northeast part of the country, but not major confrontations as such. After the summer of 1999, the violence continued to escalate and become totally out of control. this is the brief narrative of how it evolved out of the context of widespread rise of Islamist movements in Nigeria and the West Africa region and even the other parts of the Islamic world. Initially, they were not violent at all. They were just radical in the sense that their views are not the mainstream view of the majority of Muslims in the country. But the violence began only about 10 years ago or so.
You said 10 years ago or 10 years ago? Was it, did you say?
From less than 10 years, I think in the mid-1920s, local skirmishes, as early as 2002, 2004, local skirmishes in different localities were happening, but they were being contained.
Mm-hmm.
But the major violence that caught everybody's attention was the one that broke out in July of 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And that has been the one that is kind of gotten out of hand to the present. So that will be like 6 years.
6 years.
Days of violence. Yes, but earlier phases, around 2002, 2004, the violence was localized.
Right. So can I ask you a question, one more further question about that before we turn to Dr. Fatima? What do you think is the appeal of the group for young people? Why are they joining this? I understand you saying that it's connected to the spread of violent groups in other parts of the world. Can you just talk, if you're a young person, what is it that attracts you to that? There's a debate going on, because we're finding, obviously, even, in every part of the world, we're finding young people from Britain, the US, et cetera, going to join ISIS, et cetera. So there seems to be a number of drivers that's sending young people into this. What would, there are economic incentives when there's poverty, et cetera, and nothing else to do. But what would you say is the ideological appeal, or maybe the less the religious appeal? Because we understand this isn't viewed by the majority of Muslims worldwide as appropriate way to be religious. But what is the, I would say, ideological or maybe patriotic or somehow the sense of identity? Do you think that that's a driver bringing young people into it? Are they looking for something? They're looking for something to belong to? In the United States, we have gangs where young people join gangs because they want to feel part of a family. Talk to us about what really pushes young people into this decision to join a group.
So both in the specific context of Nigeria and in the broader literature on radicalization, the important finding is that there are several causes and different factors that would attract individuals towards radical movements. The popular view is that it's economic poverty that drive most people into a radical movement. This is too simplistic.
Right.
If only because majority of the poor do not become radical. This is the fact that perhaps as much as 90+% of poor people are simply not radicalized in any sense of the word. Therefore, economic factors alone, while relevant, are not the only factors. Sometimes this argument is nuanced by adding economic deprivation and severe inequality. While you have the mixture of the two, you could expect that to contribute to radicalization. But there are also political reasons, there are also social reasons, and of course you mentioned ideological and religious reasons that may lead individuals to become radicalized. Mm-hmm. Now, when we look at specific individuals, as some of the studies that we have done, we discover that many individuals have different pathways that grown them into radical movements. And these individual pathways vary. According to one study, there are as many as 10 different pathways that attract young people to radical movements, including thrill-seeking, revenge. Some are recruited and paid to go and cause violent actions. Some have family dynamics that conduct them into becoming reasons that motivate people to become radicalized are varied.
Yeah.
Similarly, when we look at individual actors, their motivation to become radicalized are also varied. Interestingly, in terms of ideology specifically, our research finding is that ideological call on radical movements is at best ambiguous, in the sense that many of the rank and file members of radical groups do not appreciate what the ideological reasoning is. Few of the leadership might be familiar with ideology and the finer points of theology that justifies their radicalism, but the vast majority of the rank and file might not be aware or sufficiently informed of the ideological or religious basis of the radicalism, simply because maybe what brought them into the radical movement were not ideological reasons to begin with. There may have been family reasons, there may have been social reasons, there may have been economic reasons, there may have been political reasons. So what we find in our study is that ideology in general and religious convictions in particular have ambiguous and sometimes very unclear impact on the radicalization of rank and file members of these movements.
That's interesting. And if you know, if our audience is
Hello, can you hear me?
This is Melinda
Yes.
from the Carter Center as well. It seems that our moderator has lost her connection, so I will continue with the questions first. So she was beginning to ask about the impacts of the conflict with Boko Haram in terms of what you've seen in the community around physical, psychological, emotional, and community health.
Yes. Well, the impact, as you can imagine, has been enormous, but also varied in different communities that have been affected. There are community impacts in terms of the destruction of community life and the forced evacuation of local members of community to safe havens away from their homes. So several communities have been devastated in this sense. Everyday life has become virtually impossible. In addition, several people have become destitute as a result of the destruction of their homes and their properties and their businesses. This has taken a heavy toll on their economic well-being. Similarly, the trauma of witnessing large-scale violence, even if one escapes from being personally injured, witnessing of horrific violence leaves a strong impact on some individuals. And one of the saddest part of this tragedy is that there are no mechanisms of helping traumatized people to overcome the trauma and regain any sense of normality. I think this is one major area that requires further attention from all the stakeholders. How do you help the victims who have witnessed but perhaps have not directly suffered some of the horrific violence to deal with the emotional and psychological trauma that they are dealing with? Now, there is also the special case of women who have been adversely affected in addition to the several community problems that they may have faced. Several women were abducted and there were reports of sexual violence and forced marriages. This is an additional impact on the community that requires specialized attention, like the one that attends to the question of trauma of those who have observed but have themselves escaped the violence. Now, these like if you look at it, apart from the physical destruction of property and loss of life, there are these other impacts that have damaged everyday life, that have forced people into destitution, that has destroyed communities in every sense of the word. These are some of the horrific impact. It's unfortunate that in the heat of the moment, many of the people who need specialized assistance are not yet getting it. Perhaps we hope if things get better, some of these lingering impacts may be addressed.
Great. Thank you for that description. I wanted to go now to Dr. Fatima Akilu, who's been working with communities on some of the prevention, and perhaps you can speak to the role that your work is taking in creating some resources and some treatment for the survivors, especially in those internally displaced people and women and girls, as Professor Umar brought up.
Thank you. There are many programs that have been designed both by the Office of the National Security Advisor and also other agencies to work in communities and combat and ameliorate some of the damage that Boko Haram has done. One which is I'm not directly responsible for is a Northern Nigerian Economic Development Plan that includes multiple levels, including the settlement of refugees. It also includes a safe school program, which looks at how to secure schools, how to rebuild schools that have been destroyed by terrorists, and also how to get people who have not been in school back into schools. They also have a program that looks at how do you creatively educate people who are no longer in their homes and perhaps are in refugee camps or are in places where there are no physical schools available. So that's one such program. In terms of what we are doing, we have a framework for engagement in post-traumatic stress disorder. And this is a national program that we have partnered with one of the main agencies that is responsible for providing national health care. And we are training in excess of about 7,000 workers in post-traumatic stress disorder. In addition, we have developed and designed a program of engagement with civil society to provide post-traumatic stress disorder in areas that we can't reach. We have a physical center in Kanu that has been operational for the last year, and it actually works directly with victims of terrorism. So those are some of the things that we do in terms of trauma approaches in our office, but the government has a wider plan that engages communities in other forms of relief, including food aid, including rebuilding of their homes, the rebuilding of bridges that have been destroyed by terrorists. And also, I think that there is a plan in place to work with engaging communities in dialogue with host communities where they currently reside, and also in getting them to return to communities that they have left and been accepted back into communities that they have left.
Okay, very interesting. Before we move on to ask you to speak more about the programs that you're working on to counter and prevent violent extremism and the exacerbation of the conflict any further, I was wondering if you could tell us a few specific stories of survivors or those affected by the conflict that you have experienced through your work.
Well, we have a group that we are currently working with who are in host community, but have all of them have been directly affected by conflict. Some have lost members of their families. Some have witnessed unimaginable terror. And there is a group of young men that we have engaged who have not been able to go to school for the past 3 months. So we have designed education program for them. And also we are trying to provide counseling and trauma support. We are also trying to work with young women who have been directly affected by Boko Haram, including one of the women who was a potential suicide bomber. We are working now to rehabilitate, to try and get her into our custody so that we could rehabilitate her. So that's one of the programs that we do that directly affect people. But we also we have about 300 people that we offer psychosocial support to on a weekly and a bi-weekly basis in Kanu. Every single one of those 300 has been directly affected by a terrorist incident that has happened over the past 24 months in Kanu. I think there's been about 4 or 5 major bombings. So these are all direct victims of those bombings. And as I talk about my program more, I will also talk about how we engage the terrorists themselves and how we attempt to rehabilitate them.
Mm-hmm. Great. Before we go on to ask you more about your work, I want to bring Jaye Gaskia into the conversation. I'm wondering if you could speak about the civil society response, both religious leaders and others, to the violent narratives and the sort of identity warfare that's been engaged in by these extremist groups, especially around the gendered aspects relating to women and girls.
Okay. The Partnership Against Violent Extremism is a network of civil society and some government institutions, agencies, working around the question of violent extremism. As made clear earlier, this network itself is a very young network, just about less than 6 months old. But it is made up of a number of civil society organizations, many of which are partners, have been partners to the Office of National Security Advisor on some of their programs, including the State Project, approach to countering violent extremism. And they are based around the country, across the geopolitical zones. So basically, as a forum, one of the things that we had to do immediately, first I should give you a background first that many of the civil society organizations and the community organizations that are part of this network have themselves a history of working on issues around violence in general and then violent extremism in particular. Particularly some of the interfaith organizations, the faith-based organizations, and the interfaith organizations that are also part of the network. They have had this history. And one of the things that we then have decided to look at as a network is to agree on what the issues are that we would be really focusing on. Given again that just a quick throwback to what the professor was saying earlier, that part of the issues that we have identified, in addition to every other thing, is also the fact that that the sense of alienation of youth, which is why we are deciding to work on how to integrate youth into society and societal restore societal cohesion. The question of alienation of youth and what then makes communities like violent groups like Boko Haram become like family and offer a sense of belonging, but also a sense of power for those who are alienated and powerless. So bearing all of this in mind, the areas that we are working on, the thematic areas around peace building and conflict resolution, women and youth, and particularly focusing on the training and capacity building programs for women on early warning and early response, and also economic empowerment activities. Now, the reason for this is that the reason for early warning really is that we want to be able to, and we are working with the same project on developing what we are calling the markers, the indicators of radicalization, because the focus of the network really is to prevent radicalization and to ensure that we separate at-risk youth from getting recruited by the violent groups. So a lot of what we are focusing on, therefore, is around building capacity of women and youth groups in communities, including faith-based organizations, on how to track the progressive development of radicalization, and therefore what needs to be done to counter each of these and to prevent radicalization from becoming violent radicalization and the role of extremism.
Well,
a number of
very interesting work, and it sounds like there's a lot of important collaborations going on there between civil society and the government and local communities. I also wanted to mention that last week, 2 weeks ago, our last roundtable, we were discussing the similar efforts in Pakistan and the important role in terms of early detection and early warning, as well as in interrupting the radicalization process that women and girls have. I want to come back to what you mentioned around faith-based initiatives, but first I want to go back to Fatima and ask her, when did the focus of the National Security Advisor become focused on alternatives to military engagement? So we've seen a lot of counterterrorism strategies, especially those promulgated from the West, from the US, is often focusing strongly on military options. And your soft approach, it's called, I hear, to which involves development and local engagement, is somewhat innovative. I'm wondering when and how you decided to pursue this approach.
I think about 3 years ago, there was a decision made about expanding our national security architecture. And that expansion meant that they would have to include things more to do with human security. It was within that debate over the expansion of the national security role and also the national security architecture that thinking started to evolve around the idea of a non-military approach to combating terrorism. And I was hired exactly 3 years ago because they needed a psychologist to look at it from a different perspective. And we were given the mandate to design a program that was complementary to the military, but would include community, would include youth, would also include building bridges. And what we did was we took about a year to study what the problem was in Nigeria, how the cause of terrorism in Nigeria, and came up with an approach that we felt was multiple pronged and addressed our needs. So essentially, what we did was we developed a model that has 3 main strands, and these are de-radicalization, counter-radicalization, and strategic communication. We felt that the best approach for us in Nigeria was one that would build institutions. We are really a policy making outfit. We are not implementers by and large. And we felt that what we would do is work within existing structures to build capacity. An example of this is our de-radicalization program, which is a partnership with the Nigerian Prison Service. And in that de-radicalization program, we try to engage with Boko Haram members and Ansarudin members who are in our custody. The program really consists of about 4 main elements. We engage them on an ideological basis through the use of imams. We also engage them psychologically, so we developed a cognitive behavioral approach. We also offer them vocational training, and we offer them sport. The de-radicalization program has multiple layers. For those who are in prison custody, they go through this program, and there is no time limit. We have psychologists that do risk assessments to find out when they are deemed to be no longer a risk to society. Those who are deemed to be no longer posing a risk, they come into a program that we call our aftercare, which is a community-based rehabilitation model. Within the community rehabilitation model, we also have some of the same basic elements. Psychology, we engage them ideologically. We offer them a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, because we found that at the root of a lot of the youth radicalization is this identity deficit, this search for meaning, which is not dissimilar to people who sometimes join gangs. It is one of the reasons that people join terrorist groups. So we try to help them to reconnect. And with the aftercare model, there is also a reintegration element for when they're ready. So that also includes working with communities to prepare them to accept rehabilitated terrorists. So as you can appreciate, this is a long-term project that will involve many, many years. On the counter-radicalization, this is our community engagement piece. We work on multiple projects. One of it is education. We have developed what we call a creative curriculum, and essentially what it is, it's really it's a new philosophy of teaching that places critical thinking and logical reasoning at the heart of the curriculum from grade 1 all the way to grade 12. Uh, we have found that another reason that a lot of young people have joined Boko Haram in particular is because they have lacked the ability to think critically and logically. So when they have been confronted with a charismatic leader, it has been very easy for him to convince them with his singular narrative. So we engage in schools in that, and we also reintroduce in sports, art, music. These are not things that are not part of the curriculum. It's just that in recent times we really haven't had the resources and teachers in a lot of public schools to teach those subjects. So we are working with some schools to pilot this creative curriculum. In addition, we are also just about to open a Center for Psychology. This is really a training institute because we want to broaden our reach on the provision of psychological services. We don't have very many clinicians, and we don't have it in the field of psychology in Nigeria. So it's an opportunity to train a lot more people because we've realized that with terrorism, they are also opportunities. So one of the opportunities that we found is to remake our mental health framework to include psychology and to broaden it. So the center will allow us to train people, civil society, and also psychologists to be able to have the numbers of mental health clinicians that we need in the areas of need. Another thing that we do on that platform that Jaye has spoken about is working with religious groups, both inter and interfaith. Currently, we have 57 imams, 7 women scholars that we have trained over a year and a half, and they work in communities. We developed a curriculum that is more inclusive and includes teaching about what Islam says about democracy, about development, about jihad. So they have been working in the communities with young people. And on the Counter platform, we are also developing what we call centers of imagination, because we have felt that it's really important that youth have places to go where they can develop a sense of self, self-esteem, identity. They can also be exposed to multiple paths and avenues to excel. There must be multiple spaces for our youth. And these centers of imagination are really very simple concepts. They are modeled after the YMCA in Europe and the Boys and Girls Club in the US. They're just safe spaces for people, for youth to come, where they can learn basic literacy, numeracy, computer skills. But we would also mentor them, and they would be leadership courses and classes, and they would have access to sporting facilities within those centers, as well as counseling.
I really,
with women.
If I can just interject here, I really love the name Centers of Imagination. I think it's wonderful, and also the focus on bringing in creative curricular aspects to education, arts, and other forms of creative output. So I think that that's very innovative and makes me think about our increasing focus in parts of the world, including the U.S., on focusing on math, science, education, which is of course important, but often it's at the expense of such creative and arts, investment in creativity and arts. And so I'm really thinking that this has important implications, not only in Nigeria, but what you're finding for around the world. I was wondering if I could bring it back to the work you spoke about with religious leaders. I know that Jaye has also been involved in engaging religious leaders and civil society work. And I'm wondering if both of you perhaps could speak to the specific challenges, but also the potential of that work and how the process you found, what are some of the lessons you've learned in engaging those initial 57 plus 7 women scholars and imams in this work?
Right. on our part, in Nigeria, we have a lot of different religious sects within Islam and Christianity. So for us, it was important that we get all these different strands of Islam to talk about terrorism with one voice, to agree on a common voice, which would form a powerful narrative. So that was really our starting point. We looked at it first within faith and then between faith. Within faith, one of the things that we have done is to bring together a group of Islamic scholars from across the country, whereby we work to develop a common framework for combating terrorism using imams and religious instructors because they are nearer the community. We have a long way to go. Where we would like to get to eventually is some kind of voluntary checks or monitoring of preaching, both in schools and in churches. There is a lot of hate speeches in both religious schools and also in places of worship at the moment. And so we are not trying to regulate preaching in Nigeria, but we are trying to bring together all these different religious movements to come together to work on a common framework whereby we have a common understanding of what Islam says about certain things that have been misinterpreted by terrorists. For example, the role, the place of democracy in Islam, and also what Islam actually says about jihad. So that's one of the things that we're doing. On the interfaith platform, there are a lot of groups that have already been working on that for a long time in Nigeria. And what we're doing is really just partnering with those groups to get us again to speak with one voice on the issues of terrorism and also youth enemy. How can religion be used as a place that fosters belonging for a lot of young people in Nigeria? And so I'd like to hear what Jaye would like to add to his own work on the religious environment.
Yes, Jaye, please, if you want to add to that description.
Okay. Yes. Some of the things that we have done, we are doing that complemented what the Office of the National Security Advisor is doing, is that we, for example, in our fold is the Federation of Muslim Women Association of Nigeria, and what we have found out is that at the community level, the dynamics between the dynamics within faith and also between faith, and particularly as it relates to the clerics, to the leadership, the dynamic is a little bit different at community level, and sometimes even more positive than at the broader national level, where religious leaders sometimes become partisanly political. And therefore that can then pose a challenge. So some of the things that have happened with communities and that have really helped is when you see clerics from the different faiths mobilizing the religious, different religious communities to come together. In fact, one of the successes of this is to come together to defend communities, to provide support for victims, impacted members of the community, and the rest of that. What this has done is to help to counter the initial narrative that Boko Haram, because it was supposed to be some form of radical political Islam, was against Christians. And so that has helped to counter that narrative and helps to build, rather at the community level, a sense of a common understanding of a common threat to community, and therefore a common response to it. You can see this in the way in which the two religious communities have jointly participated in and supported work around improving civil security relations, particularly when you then have the development of as a way of refocusing the attention of the development of what in Nigeria became known as the Civilian Joint Task Forces, which are groups of community vigilantes, but that are actually now interfaith, including people from all the faiths. And this has helped community cohesion. It has also helped, particularly in providing and securing safe spaces for women and children in communities. One of the challenges that one of the big challenges to this work really is now much more around political interference by political leaders, particularly when political leaders try to then use religion for political ends. And we had that challenge during the recent electionary campaign. Fortunately, because communities had already built these cross-faith, interfaith responses, it was not able to split communities again into the mutually antagonistic Christian-Muslim camps. And I think that this has been one of the key things in terms of the positive outcomes, but it is also a reflection of some of the challenges and the potential for drawback. So the necessity to work at higher levels on the higher echelons of the religious leadership of both faiths, and then to ensure that they do not become susceptible to partisanship at the political level. These are some of the things that we found work well.
Yeah. That's very interesting and brings us right in the direction that I'd like to go for the last 10 minutes of our conversation, which is looking to the future. And first, I want to ask Fatima on the aftermath of this historic election and major changes for Nigeria. I'm wondering if you could speak to the potential future you see of this particular soft approach to violent extremism under the new administration, the new Buhari presidential administration.
Well, I think the president-elect has always spoken about putting security as a priority when he gets into office, and in particular combating Boko Haram. We feel that we have developed the architecture for long-term approach to combating terrorism, not just Boko Haram, but future acts of terrorism if they should happen. We are working within existing institutions, for example, through the Ministry of Education for our basic curriculum. We're working with the Nigerian Prison Service for part of our de-radicalization program. And we're also working with the agency tasked with primary health care in Nigeria for our parts of our post-traumatic stress disorder. What we reckon is that for us to combat terrorism, we have to change not just institutions, but also society. So these are not things that I think a new government coming into power would reverse, because there is no alternative but a multi-pronged one, which includes all of government. We have about 22 agencies of government involved in various aspects of the soft approach. So we are not anticipating a great deal of change, because we know that the military is only one approach. It needs a complementary approach, and we feel that based on the research that we've done and the work that we've done so far, that this is a viable alternative.
Yes. Can I bring? Yes, that sounds promising, and I wish you all the best in continuing to invest in these non-military approaches, which are such an important complement to any hard security strategies. Professor Umar, I would like to bring you back in now. And in looking to the future, I'm wondering if from your research and work in this field, if you could speak to us about what you see as most needed in northern Nigeria and throughout the country to advance the development of these coordinated community level responses to violent extremism.
Yeah, I think the presentation that the Fatima made spoke to all the necessary and relevant steps are already underway. And that is the right way to go. The only thing to add is that the sheer size of the country, the scale of it, and the complexity of Nigerian society means that much more resources will probably be needed in the coming months and years. And that is one critical point to keep emphasizing. The Nigerian government should also solicit and cooperate with friendly countries in all the areas that Dr. Fatima had outlined. Whatever assistance could be added, we always welcome. As a popular saying has developed in Nigeria, if you think security is too expensive, try insecurity. So the major thing actually is that the scale of the problem and the diversity of the country means that enormous resources will have to be committed for the long-term strategy. And as the scholarly community continues to develop better understandings of the dynamics and the processes involved, it is also very advisable to keep the dialogue between the academic community and the policy and activist communities in a constant dialogue. Oftentimes, the academic community is obliviously unaware of what government is doing. Like some of the programs that Dr. Fatima presented, many Nigerians may not be aware that these were ongoing. So a constant dialogue between the academic community, the policy community, and the activist civil society community is, I think, critical part that need to be mainstream as we go forward. Finally, I'd like to emphasize the fact that the vast majority of the society, at least 90% or more, are not radical at all. They have no stomach for radicalism, and they are the greatest assets that need to be constantly mobilized to provide the countering force that is needed. Equally important is the understanding that not all radicals are violent, and that you may not agree with non-radical violence, non-violent radicals, you may not agree with their views, but they pose far more less trouble than those who have picked up arms in society, against society and against the state. So I like to say that a triage is necessary to separate between the mainstream society, the non-violent radicals, and the violent radicals. Oftentimes, people equate radicalism with violence, but this is not accurate. It's not always the case. A better formulation, often the one developed by a scholar out there in Akilu, Florida, his conceptual framework is radicalization into violent extremism. So there are three components that conceptually need to be appreciated: radicalization, and then extremism, and then violence. There are three different phenomena that sometimes could work out spatially, but sometimes they are not necessarily together. So this kind of finessing and sophisticated conceptual understanding of the problem is a great asset from the academic community.
Yes.
Can contribute.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those points. I think that it's been treated as a conceptual issue, the difference between radicalism and violent extremism. And I hear what you're saying is that it's also a pragmatic issue in terms of being strategic in our attempt to combat extremism, violent extremism in Nigeria, and we could take that lesson internationally as well. I also heard you calling for more collaboration, continued collaboration between academia, scholars, government agencies, as well as civil society. And I think you all are serving as a great example of the potential efficacy of coordinated efforts such as those. And then initially I heard you calling for more resources to invest in these types of approaches. And I want to spend the last few minutes and go to our other two participants, Dr. Fatima and Jaye, and just follow up with that. How can the international community help support this work, which is promoting peace and security? And do you see any drawbacks to that? Professor Umar mentioned the Nigerian government working with other countries to help invest more resources in this work. I would just like to hear your final thoughts on any way that the international community can help, whether that be governments or civilians, and any particular drawbacks or don't do's that you would mention. Dr. Fatima, and then Jaye.
Okay. I think the international community are already doing quite a lot in peace and security, but there is still a lot more that can be done. One of the areas is in the identification of the funding gaps. Very often you have multiple agencies working on the same thing, so there's a lot of repetition. So it's really important that we identify where the gaps are and people really plug in those gaps. For us on our counter-violent extremism program, we still do need some more support in the areas of capacity building and the sharing of best practices. But I would also like to end with a word of caution, perhaps, that there are no two countries that are the same. Even within Nigeria, the regions are all different. We have understood this, and we have adapted programs depending on the areas that we work in. So the program for Borno will be slightly different from our program in Kano. And the international community should also take into consideration these local differences and understand that this is a Nigerian program and that the solutions must be from Nigeria. And the research that we have done has been a Nigerian-led effort. Nearly all the research is for Nigerians, and they understand the problems, and they did help us in our policy formulation. So while we welcome international support, we just want to say that
Jaye, if you're there, it seems we've lost Fatima, and she was concluding with some important words. I would like you to take the last minute or so and tell us, what do you think the international community can do, should do, and shouldn't do, perhaps?
Okay. I think that what the international community shouldn't do, let me start with that, is not to do anything that can undermine the ability of the confidence building mechanisms within the country, particularly undermine the ability of mutual confidence developing between the tripods that the Prof mentioned of the policy, government policy, the intellectual community, as well as civil society community. But I think that what we then need to do is also that we need to also develop these at the international level, and not just within Nigeria. This also has to be upskilled. And the reason for this is very simple. Quite a number of what we are doing now, for example, within Nigeria and to counter this specific expression of violence that's in Boko Haram in Nigeria, now, for example. These are things that also need to be reinforced in Nigeria, but they also need to be replicated across Nigerian borders, particularly those neighboring countries that are also impacted and affected by the Boko Haram insurgency, such that the development of relationships between civil society across these countries, the development of relationship with governmental cooperation too across these countries, and also inter-academic collaboration too across these societies. And I think that that's one area where the international community can actually really help in terms of reinforcing what is happening in the country, but also upskilling it to include this community of countries that have realized that they are actually facing a common threat and addressing that threat militarily. We need the soft approach to also complement that military response across the countries too.
Thank you very much, Jay. And I keep hearing collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. So I want to leave on that note, and also the elevation of local context and listening to the local actors who are living this every day and working hard to create security and peace in their societies. I want to thank you all, Professor Umar, Dr. Fatima, Jaye, Gaskia, for your dedication to this work and for joining us today. Thank you very much, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye.